They found the young Apache woman wounded and abandoned in the middle of the road. No one else wanted to help. 20 years later, when two poor farmers saw her dismount from her horse at the head of an armed army, their knees began to tremble. When she recognized them in front of everyone, silence fell over the valley. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment where in the world you're watching from, because now I'm going to tell you everything. The morning sun was a white-hot coin in the sky, and the air in the Arizona territory felt like a wool blanket pulled tight over the mouth. Joe Dawson wiped his forehead with a ragged sleeve. "My gut is all twisted up today, Ben. It is too quiet. Even the birds are thinking twice about this heat." Ben Carter did not look up from the fence post he was tying. His thick hands moved the rough rope in slow, sure loops. "It is August," he said. His voice was low and flat. "It is always hot." "But this is a thinking heat," Joe insisted. He leaned against the wooden fence, the bones in his shoulders pressing through his worn shirt. He looked out across their land. The grass was pale yellow, and the dirt was the color of rust. Their 5 cows stood under the only tree, barely moving. "It is a heat that waits for you to make a mistake." Ben finished his knot and tested it with a hard pull. "Only mistake is standing here talking about it. The creek is low. Need to check the south pasture." They got on their horses. Joe's old horse, Dusty, moved with a tired sway. Joe patted his neck. I know, he murmured to the animal. "Just a little longer today. Then you get all the water you can drink." Ben led the way down the dry trail toward the line of dusty hills. The town of Cedar Fork was a small group of buildings far behind them. It was just the two of them, like it had been for more years than either man could easily count. They rode without talking for a long time. The only sounds were the creak of their saddles and the crunch of dry earth under the horses' hooves. Ben raised a hand and stopped. He was staring at a spot ahead where the trail curved. "What is it?" Joe asked, his throat suddenly tight. Ben did not answer. He urged his horse forward a few steps, then stopped again. He pointed. There, just off the trail near a clump of brown brush, was a small shape. It was a child, lying on its side. Joe's breath caught. "Oh no!" They jumped down from their horses and ran over. It was a girl. She was young, maybe 9 or 10 years old. She wore a simple torn dress made of deer hide. Her long black hair was matted with dirt. On her shoulder, a dark stain spread across the leather. She was bleeding from a wound. She was not moving. Ben knelt first. He put 2 fingers on the side of her neck. He waited. Then he gave a short nod. "Alive. Apache," Joe whispered, looking at her clothes. His heart was beating very fast. Everyone in Cedar Fork said to stay away from the Apache. They said it meant trouble. The girl's eyes fluttered open. They were dark with pain and fear. She saw the 2 men above her and she tried to shrink away, a tiny pained sound escaping her lips. "Easy now, easy," Joe said. His voice was soft. He looked at Ben. "We cannot leave her." Ben's face was like stone. He was thinking. He looked at the empty hills, then back at the girl. A dead child on your land brought more problems than a living one. That was what he told himself. But he also saw the way she shivered, even in the terrible heat. "No," Ben said finally. "We cannot." Joe took off his hat and fanned the girl's face. "What is your name, little one? Can you tell me your name?" She just stared, her breathing quick and shallow. Ben took a canteen from his saddle. He poured a little water onto a clean corner of his shirt and gently dabbed at the girl's mouth. She flinched but did not pull away. Her eyes watched his every move. "It is a gunshot wound," Ben said, looking at her shoulder. "Not an arrow, a bullet." "Who would shoot a child?" Joe said, anger rising in his thin chest. Ben did not answer. He was already thinking of the next step. "We need to get her home. The ride will be hard on her." Together they were very careful. Joe lifted the girl, who was light as a sack of feathers. She cried out when he moved her arm. "I am sorry. I am so sorry," he whispered over and over. He held her close, trying to absorb the jarring motion of the horse with his own body. Ben rode close beside them, watching the girl's face. The sun was past the middle of the sky when their small ranch house came into view. It was a simple building of wood and clay with a sagging porch. It was not much, but it was all they had. Joe carried the girl inside into the cool, dim room. He laid her on his own bed. Ben was already building a fire to heat water. The girl's eyes were open, wide and watching. She followed Joe as he moved around the room. "It is all right," Joe said, forcing a smile. "You're safe here. My name is Joe. That is Ben. We are going to fix you up." Ben brought the warm water and a clean cloth. His movements were slow and precise. "This will hurt," he told the girl. He did not lie. She bit her lip when he cleaned the wound, but she did not scream. She was very brave. Joe held her small hand and talked about nothing, just to fill the silence. He talked about his horse Dusty, and how the chickens had stopped laying eggs, and how he wished for just one good rain. Ben finished cleaning and put a clean bandage on the wound. The girl's eyes started to close, exhaustion finally taking over. Joe sat on a chair beside the bed. Ben stood in the doorway, looking out. "The people in town," Ben said. "They will not like this." "I do not care what they like," Joe said, his eyes on the sleeping girl. "We did the only thing there was to do." Ben was quiet for a long time. He looked back at the small figure in the bed, her chest rising and falling softly. He gave one slow nod. It was enough. Night fell. The two old ranchers ate their simple beans in silence. The only sound was the gentle breathing of the child they had saved. Outside, the first stars appeared over the hard, dry land. A new and uncertain chapter had begun inside the little house, and none of them knew what the morning would bring. The girl slept through the rest of that day and all through the night. Joe did not sleep much. He sat in the chair by the bed, getting up sometimes to put a cool cloth on her forehead. Ben slept on the floor by the fireplace, his breathing deep and even. When the first light of morning came through the window, the girl was awake. She watched Joe with those large, dark eyes. She did not move. "Good morning," Joe said softly. He smiled. "Are you hungry?" She did not answer. Ben was already moving in the small kitchen area. The smell of coffee filled the room. He brought over a cup of warm broth. Joe helped the girl sit up, propping pillows behind her. She winced but let him. Ben held the cup. He blew on the broth to cool it, then held it to her lips. She hesitated, looking from his face to the cup. Then she sipped. She sipped again, a little faster. "Good," Ben said. It was the only word he spoke. That was how the first week passed. The girl slept and ate. Her wound began to close. She did not speak. She watched everything. She watched Joe talk to his horse. She watched Ben count the nails as he mended a broken bucket. Her eyes followed them as they moved around the small house. One afternoon, Joe was trying to make biscuits. He was a terrible cook. The girl was sitting at the table, wrapped in one of Joe's old shirts. She pointed to the hard, lumpy dough. "Biscuit," Joe said, holding one up. She looked at it. She did not say the word. Ben came in from outside. He saw the biscuits on the table. He picked one up, tapped it on the wood. It made a solid sound. "They are edible," he said to Joe. He took a bite, chewed for a long time and swallowed. He looked at the girl, passed the beans. Joe passed the pot of beans. The girl watched Ben. Then, very slowly, she reached her small hand across the table. She touched the bean pot. She looked at Ben. "Beans," Ben said. Her mouth moved silently. Then a sound came out. "Beans." Joe stopped moving. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. "Yes, beans. That's it." A tiny, almost invisible smile touched the girl's lips. It was there and then gone. After that, she began to learn words: milk, cow, water, sky. Joe named everything for her. Ben showed her things. He took her outside, holding her good arm to steady her. He pointed to the chicken coop. "Chickens," he said. "Chickens," she repeated. He showed her how to scatter grain. She threw a small handful. The chickens clucked and pecked at her feet. She watched them, her head tilted. Weeks turned into months. The girl grew stronger. She wanted to help. Joe showed her how to milk the old cow, placing her small hands in the right position. The first time she got a stream of milk to hit the pail, she laughed. It was a clear, sweet sound that made Joe's eyes crinkle with joy. Ben taught her practical things. He showed her how to wrap wire around a fence post, how to find the eggs the hens hid in the barn. He spoke to her in short, clear sentences. "Hold it here, tighten this, watch for snakes." She was a quick learner. She remembered everything. One day they went into the town of Cedar Fork for supplies. Joe held the girl's hand. People stopped talking to stare. A woman named Agnes, who worked in the general store, crossed her arms. "That is an Apache child, Joe Dawson," Agnes said, her voice sharp. "She is a child," Joe said, his voice tight. "You are asking for trouble," Agnes said. "They are not like us. Send her away before her people come and burn your ranch to the ground." Ben, who was loading sacks of flour, did not look up. "Our business," he said. His tone did not invite more talk. The girl pressed closer to Joe's leg. She understood the angry tone, even if she did not know all the words. They did not go to town very often after that. Back at the ranch, life found a new rhythm. The girl followed Joe around like a shadow. She helped him feed the animals. She began to string English words together. "Joe, the cow is there." "Ben, the fence is broken." One evening, after a long day, they were all sitting on the porch. The sky was turning orange and purple. Wildflowers had bloomed after a rare rain, little spots of yellow and blue near the house. Joe looked at the girl. She was looking at the flowers. "We need to call you something," he said. "A name for here." Ben nodded slowly. He was carving a piece of wood with his knife. Joe pointed to the delicate yellow flowers by the steps. "Those are lilies, wild lilies. They are tough. They come back even when it is dry." He looked at her. "What about Lily?" The girl looked at the flowers. She looked at Joe's kind, wrinkled face. She looked at Ben's calm hands. "Lily," she said. She pointed to herself. "Lily." "Yes," Joe said, his heart feeling too big for his chest. Ben held out the piece of wood he was carving. It was a small, rough shape of a horse. He gave it to Lily. She took it and held it carefully. "Thank you, Ben." A whole year passed. Lily was part of everything. She spoke English well. She could milk the cow and mend a fence. She laughed when Joe told silly stories. She listened carefully to Ben's instructions. The small ranch felt different. It felt like a home, but the outside world had not forgotten. Sometimes riders would pass on the distant trail. Sometimes men from town would look toward their land with hard eyes. The fear that Agnes, the storekeeper, had spoken of was always there, a quiet whisper on the edge of the wind. Joe felt it in his tight stomach. Ben saw it in the way people watched them. Lily, who now understood, felt it too. They were a family, but they were a family inside a fragile fence. The morning was so quiet that Joe could hear the creek water moving over stones from 100 paces away. He stood on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, and listened to the silence. It was a heavy silence. Even the birds were not singing. Ben came out, pulling on his work gloves. He stopped next to Joe and looked toward the hills. His body was very still. "You feel it too?" Joe asked, his voice low. Ben gave a single, slow nod. He was not looking at the land. He was listening to it. The door of the house opened, and Lily stepped out. She was now 10 years old, her hair braided neatly like Ben had shown her. She carried the small wooden horse in her hand, a thing she always kept close. She looked at their faces. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Nothing for you to worry on," Joe said, trying to smile. "Just a quiet morning." But Lily walked to the edge of the porch and looked in the same direction as Ben. Her eyes scanned the line where the pale land met the blue sky. She froze. "There," she whispered. At first, Joe saw nothing. Then he saw movement. Shapes detached themselves from the shadows of the far hills. One, then three, then more. Men on horses. They were too far away to see clearly, but the way they moved was not like cowboys or ranchers. They moved together, like one thing. Ben's breath came out in a short sigh. "Get inside, Lily." Lily did not move. She took a step forward, squinting. "They are my people," she said, and her voice was a mix of wonder and fear. Joe's heart dropped into his stomach. He had known this day might come, but he had pushed the thought away. He looked at Ben. Ben's jaw was tight. Without a word, Ben turned and went into the house. He came back out with his old rifle. He did not point it. He just held it at his side. The riders kept coming. There were many of them, maybe 20. Their horses were painted with lines and circles. The men wore clothes of leather and carried long rifles or bows. They rode without hurry, but with purpose. They were coming straight for the ranch. Joe put a hand on Lily's shoulder. "You should go inside." "No," she said. She stood straight, her small shoulders back. "I must see." The warriors fanned out as they reached the flat land before the house. They stopped. Their horses stamped in blue air. The men's faces were stern, their eyes missing nothing. They looked at the house, the barn, the two old men on the porch, and the girl between them. One man rode forward a few steps more. He was older, with a face like carved wood. His eyes locked on Lily. He spoke. His words were strange and sharp to Joe's ears, a language of hard sounds and soft flows. Lily's hand went to her mouth. She took a step down from the porch. "What is he saying?" Joe asked, his hand still on her shoulder. Lily turned to look at him. Her eyes were bright with tears. "He says I am White Dove. He says my family has searched for many seasons. He is my mother's brother. He says I must come home." Ben spoke, his voice rough. "You do not have to go." The Apache man spoke again, his tone firm. He looked at Ben and Joe now. He pointed to Lily, then back toward the hills. Lily translated, her voice shaking. "He says I belong with my people. He says you kept me safe, and for this they are thankful. But now I must go." The man on the horse nodded. He said one more word, gesturing to a horse that one of the younger warriors was leading. It was a small, gentle-looking mare. "He says they have a horse for me," Lily whispered. Joe knelt down in front of her. His eyes were wet. "Lily, you want to go with them?" She looked from Joe's sad face to Ben's stern one. She looked at the wooden horse in her hand. Then she looked at the warriors, at her uncle. Her chin trembled. "It is my family," she said. "I remember my mother's face. I remember the sound of my grandmother's songs. I must go." Ben put his rifle down against the porch post. He walked over and stood next to Joe. He looked at Lily for a long moment. Then he gave one of his rare, small nods. "Go on then." Lily threw her arms around Ben's waist, hugging him tight. He put one big, awkward hand on her head. Then she turned and hugged Joe, who held her close, smelling the sun in her hair. "I will remember you," she said into his shirt. "You come back if you need to," Joe said, his voice cracking. "You hear? This is always your home." Lily let go. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She walked down the steps and across the hard dirt. The young warrior brought the small mare forward. Lily put her foot in a stirrup and pulled herself up. She sat on the horse like she had been born there. She looked back at Joe and Ben one more time. She raised her hand. Joe raised his in return. Ben just stood, his arms crossed tight over his chest. The older warrior spoke a command. The group of riders turned. Lily was in the middle of them. They began to move back across the land, toward the hills. Joe and Ben watched until the riders were just dark shapes against the sun. They watched until the shapes disappeared into the heat haze. The silence came back. It was deeper now. Joe cleared his throat. "Well," he said. He could not think of anything else to say. Ben picked up his rifle. He looked at the empty yard, at the closed door of the house. He looked at the spot where Lily's small mare had stood. "Fence needs mending in the south pasture," Ben said. His voice was flat. He walked toward the barn. Joe stayed on the porch, staring at the empty horizon. The ranch, which had felt like a home for a whole year, was now just a house in a very big, very quiet land. 20 years passed. The silence that Lily left behind never really filled up. It just became part of the house, like the dust on the windowsills or the familiar creak of the porch floorboards. Joe Dawson was 62 years old. His tall frame was bent now, like a tree that had fought too many winds. His hands shook a little as he poured coffee into 2 tin cups. Ben Carter was 64. He was thicker, slower, his movements careful against the aches in his joints. The ranch was a mirror of the two men, worn out, patched up, and barely holding on. Joe set a cup in front of Ben at the rough kitchen table. "The brown hen is not laying," Joe said. "Not for 3 weeks," Ben said. He did not look up from mending a leather strap. "We are down to 4 cows. The big one is sick. I do not think she will see the winter." "I know," Ben said. His needle went in and out of the leather. "The well water is tasting bitter." Ben finally looked up. His eyes, deep set under gray brows, met Joe's. "I know, Joe. I know all of it." Joe sat down heavily. His pale eyes looked around the room. It was the same as it had always been, yet it felt emptier. "I keep thinking she might just walk up that road one day. All grown up." Ben did not answer. He pulled the thread tight and bit it off with his teeth. He had thought the same thing every single day for 20 years. He never said it. A hard knock came at the front door. It was not a friendly sound. Both men looked up, surprised. They did not get visitors. Ben stood up. Joe followed him to the door. Sheriff Dale Gantry stood on their porch. He was a broad man with a star pinned to his vest. His face was red from the sun and from something else, a kind of permanent impatience. He smiled, but his eyes were small and sharp. "Morning, boys," Gantry said. He did not wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, his boots loud on the floor. He looked around the poor room as if he was pricing the furniture. "Sheriff," Ben said, his voice flat. "To what do we owe the honor?" Joe asked. He tried to sound friendly, but his throat felt tight. Gantry took off his hat and slapped it against his leg. Dust flew into a sunbeam. "Came to talk business. Good business for you two." He sat down at their table without being asked. "You know the Central Pacific Railroad is pushing new lines. They want a route through this valley. Right through here, matter of fact." Joe and Ben stood side by side, saying nothing. "Your land," Gantry said, pointing a thick finger at the floor, "is in the way. Now the company is willing to be fair. They are offering to buy it, clean and simple." Joe's heart gave a little jump. Money could fix the well. It could buy new seed, a new cow. "How much?" he asked. Gantry pulled a paper from his pocket. He smoothed it on the table. He said a number. It was a very small number. Ben's face did not change. "That is not fair. It is not 1/10 of what the land is worth, even like this." Gantry's smile did not waver. "It is what is being offered. Take it or leave it." "That is not an offer. That is a theft," Ben said, his voice low. The sheriff's friendly act dropped away. His eyes turned cold. "Listen, you old fools. You're sitting on dirt nobody wanted for 50 years. You've got no family, no money, and no future. This is a charity. I am trying to help you go somewhere you can die in peace, not out here in this ruin." Joe felt a hot anger rise in his chest. "This is our home. Our life is here." "Your life is dust and debt," Gantry sneered. "The railroad is coming. You can sell to them for this price today, or you can wait. In a month, when the legal papers are settled, they will take it for nothing. Eminent domain. You know what that means? It means it is theirs, and you get a thank you." Ben took a step forward. He was shorter than the sheriff, but he stood very solid. "You walk out now." Gantry stood up slowly. He leaned close to Ben, invading the space. "You have 1 week. 1 week to sign this paper. After that, the offer is gone, and then my help is gone. Then, maybe there is a fire, a bad accident. Things happen out here. Nobody will ask too many questions about two old hermits who did not know when to quit." Joe's breath caught. "You cannot do that." "I am the law in Cedar Fork," Gantry said, his voice a growl. "I can do what I want. You have 1 week." He put his hat back on, gave them one last look of pure contempt, and walked out. The door swung shut behind him. The room was silent. Joe looked at Ben. All the color had drained from Ben's face, but his eyes were burning. "He means it," Joe whispered. "I know he means it," Ben said. He walked to the window and watched the sheriff's horse kick up dust on the road to town. "We have got no one to help us, no money for a lawyer, no family to stand with us." Joe sank into a chair. The hopeful little jump in his heart was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy fear. He looked at the empty chair where Lily used to sit. He looked at the walls that held all their memories. "What do we do, Ben?" Ben turned from the window. His shoulders were set in a hard line. "We do not sign, we stand." And then, Ben did not have an answer. For the first time in their long life together, Joe saw a crack in his friend's stone-like certainty. It was just a flicker in his eyes, a moment of doubt. It was more frightening than anything the sheriff had said. 4 days after the sheriff's visit, Joe sat on the porch in his hard chair. The sun was a white ball of heat in the sky. He stared at the southern horizon, where the land met the hills. He was looking for hope and seeing only dust. Ben was inside, counting their few coins for the 3rd time that morning. The silence between them was not peaceful anymore. It was filled with things they could not fix. Joe's eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep. He kept seeing Sheriff Gantry's cold smile. He kept hearing the threats. He looked at the dry land, the sick cow under the tree, the fence that needed more wire than they could afford. His old fear, The one that whispered about abandonment and loss was now a loud voice in his head. They were going to lose everything. Then he saw it. A smudge on the horizon, a patch of brown against the pale blue sky. At first he thought it was just a trick of the heat. He rubbed his eyes. The smudge was still there. It was growing. "Ben," Joe called, his voice scratchy. "Ben, come out here." Ben came to the door, the coins clutched in his hand. "What is it?" "Look there, south." Joe pointed a bony finger. Ben stepped onto the porch and squinted. The smudge was wider now, spreading like spilled ink on a tablecloth. It was a cloud of dust, but the air was dead still. No wind stirred the grass. "That is not a weather storm," Ben said slowly. "No," Joe whispered. "It is not." The cloud kept growing, rising high into the sky. It moved toward them with a steady, deliberate speed. Then a sound began to reach them. A low rumble at first, felt in the floorboards more than heard. Then it grew into a steady, rolling thunder. "Horses," Ben said. The word was flat, final. "Many, many horses." Joe stood up, his knees popping. The fear in his stomach turned to ice. "Apache, after all this time?" Ben did not answer. He turned and walked back inside. When he returned, he carried his old rifle. He held it in both hands. It looked very small. The sound grew louder. The cloud of dust now filled half the southern sky. From the town of Cedar Fork, a mile away, they heard a distant bell begin to ring. A warning, then another. Doors slammed. A man's voice shouted something they could not make out. Joe saw people in the town running. They disappeared into their houses. The street emptied. "Get the other rifle," Ben said. "It will not do much good," Joe said, but he went inside and fetched it. The metal was cool in his sweaty hands. They stood side by side on the porch as the thunder filled the world. Then they saw the first shapes at the base of the dust cloud. Riders. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. A moving line of men and horses that stretched across the whole width of the valley. Sunlight flashed off metal and painted pony hides. The earth shook. "Mother of God," Joe breathed. He had never seen so many people in one place. The army of riders did not turn toward the town. They came straight on, a wave aimed directly at the Dawson and Carter ranch. The drumming of hooves was so loud it drowned out Joe's heartbeat in his ears. Ben's knuckles were white on his rifle. "This is it then." Joe thought of Lily. He wished more than anything that he knew she was safe somewhere in the world. He hoped she had lived a good life. He was glad she was not here to see this. The front line of riders was close enough now to see details. The feathers in their hair, the stripes of paint on the horses, the stern, focused expressions on their faces. They were not screaming war cries. They rode in a terrible, disciplined silence. Joe wanted to close his eyes, but he could not. He watched his death come toward him across the land he had worked for 50 years. The leaders of the group, maybe 30 riders, broke into a gallop. They pulled ahead of the main group and raced the final distance to the ranch house. Dust swirled around them like a storm. Joe raised his rifle, his arm shaking. Ben did the same. The riders did not slow. They galloped right up to the fence line. Then, at a sharp command from the front, they pulled their horses to a sudden sliding stop. The world became still. The only sounds were the snorting of horses and the jingle of tack. The huge cloud of dust began to settle over everything, coating the porch, the two old men in fine red powder. Joe and Ben stood frozen, their rifles pointed at the ground. They were surrounded. Before them was a sea of warriors, all watching them with dark, unreadable eyes. At the very front was a woman on a tall black horse. She was the leader. Her hair was in long, thick braids. She wore a shirt of animal hide decorated with beads, and her face was strong and solemn. She held a rifle across her lap. Her gaze swept over the house, the barn, and then landed on the two men on the porch. Joe looked into her eyes from across the yard. His rifle slipped from his numb fingers and clattered on the wood. The woman did not move. She just stared. And in that moment, Joe Dawson stopped breathing. The woman on the black horse did not move for a long moment. The only sound was the restless shifting of hundreds of horses and the quiet settling of the dust. Her eyes, dark and sharp, were fixed on Joe's face. Then they moved to Ben. Slowly, with a fluid grace, she swung her leg over and slid down from her horse. She stood tall on the ground, her rifle still in one hand. She handed the reins to a warrior beside her without looking. She took one step forward, then another. Her moccasins made no sound on the hard earth. Joe could not move. He could only watch her come closer. He saw the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. He saw the strength in her shoulders. He saw the old pale scar on her shoulder, just above the beadwork of her shirt. Ben had not dropped his rifle. He held it loosely, his finger away from the trigger. His eyes were narrowed, searching the woman's face. He was looking for something he remembered. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She was close enough to touch. She looked up at them, first at Ben, then her gaze returned to Joe. The stern set of her mouth began to soften. Something flickered in her eyes, breaking through the hardness like a crack in ice. Her lips parted. She blinked, and her eyes grew wet. A single tear welled up, spilled over, and cut a clean track through the layer of red dust on her cheek. Her voice, when it came, was clear and strong, yet it held a note Joe had not heard in 20 years. "Joe," she said. Then she looked at Ben. "Ben." Joe made a small sound, like the air had been punched from his lungs. His hand flew to his mouth. He shook his head, not in denial, but in utter disbelief. Ben's rifle tilted. The barrel pointed toward the ground. His other hand came up slowly, and he pulled his hat from his head, as if in respect. His mouth was a tight line. "Lily?" Joe whispered the name like a prayer. She nodded. The tear was followed by another. "It is me." Joe stumbled down the 2 porch steps. He stopped right in front of her, his whole body trembling. He reached out a shaking, knobby hand. He did not touch her face. He touched the small, carved wooden horse that hung from a leather cord around her neck. "You kept it," he said, his voice breaking. "I kept it," she said. She placed her hand over his. Her hand was strong, calloused, a woman's hand. "I kept everything." Ben came down the steps now. He stood beside Joe, looking at the woman who was once a girl. He looked at her braids, her rifle, the warriors behind her. "You survived," he said. It was all he could manage. "And thrived," she said. And for the first time, a true smile touched her lips. It changed her whole face, and in that smile they both saw the child they had loved. Joe was crying openly now, the tears making muddy tracks in his own dusty face. But all these men, why? How? Lily took a deep breath, wiping her cheek with the back of her wrist. She looked back at her warriors, then at the 2 old men. "My name is Red Stone standing now. I lead these men. We were many days away, near the mountains. Traders came through. They spoke of Cedar Fork. They spoke of a sheriff named Gantry. They said he was trying to take land from 2 old ranchers, Dawson and Carter." Her eyes burned. "They said the ranchers were going to lose everything. I knew it was you." Ben cleared his throat. "You came here for us?" "I heard the men who saved my life were in danger," Lily said, her voice firm again. "The debt of life must be honored. I brought my people to protect you, to repay the kindness." Joe looked past her at the immense gathering of warriors. They watched the scene with silent, patient faces. "To protect us? From the sheriff?" "From anyone," Lily said. She turned and raised her voice, speaking in Apache to her people. She said several sentences. One of the warriors, an older man, nodded slowly. He turned his horse and began calling out orders. The huge group began to move, dispersing in an organized way, setting up a wide camp in the flat area near the creek. They were making themselves at home. Lily turned back to them. "They will stay, as long as you need." Joe looked from the army now camping on his land to Lily's determined face. The fear of minutes ago was gone, replaced by a dizzying, impossible hope. But a new fear was already creeping in. He looked toward the town. Ben was looking that way too. His mind, always practical, was already there. The town saw this. They are terrified. Sheriff Gantry saw this. Lily followed his gaze. Her smile was gone, replaced by the calm, stern expression of a chief. "Let them see. Let him see. The message is clear. You are not alone anymore." From the porch of the ranch house, the 3 of them looked out at the new world. Behind them was the quiet home of their past. Before them was a valley holding its breath, a town locked in fear, and a sea of warriors who had come not for war, but for family. The sheriff's threat was not gone. It had just met a different kind of power. The smell of wood smoke from the Apache camp mixed with the usual dust of the ranch. Joe stood at the window, watching the warriors move with quiet purpose. They were not loud. They did not come near the house unless bringing food, venison, berries, things Joe had not tasted in years. Ben sat at the table, a cup of cold coffee in front of him. They are disciplined. This is not a war party. It is a guard. Lily, Redstone standing, nodded. She had taken a seat with them, her presence still feeling both familiar and astonishing. It is a show of strength. To make a fight seem too costly. My hope is the sheriff will see that and leave. From the town, a quarter-hour's walk away, they heard a door slam, then another. A dog barked wildly and was suddenly silenced. His kind of fear does not back down, Ben said, his eyes on the town. It gets angrier. As if to prove his point, they saw Sheriff Dale Gantry stride out into the middle of the Cedar Forks main street. He stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the Apache camp. Even from a distance, they could see the rigid set of his shoulders. He did not look afraid. He looked like a man who had just found a gold coin on the road. "Look at him," Joe murmured. "He is not thinking about running." Gantry turned and walked quickly into the town saloon. The batwing doors swung shut behind him. "He is thinking about opportunity," Lily said, her voice grim. "He sees my people not as people. He sees a tool." Inside the Silver Star Saloon, Gantry slapped the polished wood bar. The three other men in the room, his deputies, looked up. "You all saw it," Gantry said, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Hundreds of them, right on our doorstep." The deputies, men named Clive, Earl, and Thomas, nodded nervously. Clive, the youngest, spoke. "What do we do, Sheriff? Send for the army?" Gantry laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "The army? By the time they get here, we will all be dead and scalped. No, we handle this ourselves. But we need more men." He leaned in, his eyes gleaming. "Think, boys. The Apaches are not here for a picnic. They are here because Dawson and Carter invited them. Those old fools have turned traitor. They have brought savages onto settled land." Earl frowned. "They look like they were just camping, Dale." "They are camping today." Gantry slammed his fist down. "Tomorrow they raid. They will burn every farm from here to Tucson. They will take your wives, your children. Is that what you want?" Thomas paled. "No, sir." "Then we get the word out. We ride to Miller's Crossing, to Oak Flat. We tell every good God-fearing man what is happening here in Cedar Fork. We tell them the Apache are back, and they are led by a witch who was raised by the two old hermits. We tell them it is kill or be killed." Clive shifted his weight. "Is that true, though? About her being raised by them?" Gantry's smile was thin and cruel. "Does it matter? The truth is what people believe, and people will believe they need to fight to save their homes. They will believe we are heroes for leading that fight. And when the smoke clears, that railroad land will be free and clear for the taking. We will be rich, and we will be the men who saved the territory." He pushed away from the bar. "Saddle your horses. We ride in 1 hour. We are not just saving our town, boys. We are making our fortunes." Back at the ranch, Lily's second-in-command, a warrior named Kaya, came to the door. He spoke to Lily in Apache. His face was serious. Lily listened, then turned to Joe and Ben. "One of our scouts watched from the ridge. The sheriff and 3 other men just rode out of town. They took the north road toward the other settlements." Ben let out a long, slow breath. "He is doing what you said. He is spreading the word, making it bigger." Joe felt the old, familiar twist in his gut. "What do we do?" "We wait," Lily said. "We show we mean no harm. We keep our people in check. My order is clear. No one is to go near the town. No one is to raise a weapon unless attacked first." "And if he comes back with 50 angry men?" Ben asked. Lily touched the scar on her shoulder, a habit she had when thinking. "Then we stand between them and this house. We talk until we cannot talk anymore. The first shot must come from them. The world must see that." Joe looked out at the peaceful camp, at the warriors cooking food, tending horses. He looked at the quiet, terrified town. Then he looked at the empty northern road where Sheriff Gantry had gone to tell his lies. 2 kinds of fear were racing toward each other, and he was stuck right in the middle. The mob arrived with the noon sun. They came from the north road, a crowd of 30 or 40 men on horseback and in wagons. They were not soldiers. They were farmers, shopkeepers, and ranch hands from Miller's Crossing and Oak Flat. Their faces were set in hard lines of fear and anger. They carried rifles and shotguns. Sheriff Gantry rode at the front, his star gleaming. He led them to the eastern edge of Cedar Fork, where the town met the open land toward Joe and Ben's ranch. The mob spread out in an uneven line, their horses milling about nervously. From the porch, Joe, Ben, and Lily watched them come. "It is a wall of fear," Lily said quietly. She turned to Kaya, who stood waiting. "Form our wall, one line, between them and this house. No one moves forward, no weapons raised. We are a shield, not a spear." Kaya nodded and ran toward the camp, calling out orders. "What do we do?" Joe asked, his hands trembling. "You stay on the porch," Ben said. He picked up his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. "Ben, no," Lily said, her voice firm. "If you carry a gun into that space, it becomes a battle. Please." Ben looked at the rifle in his hands. He looked at the mob, then at Lily's calm, strong face. He placed the rifle back against the wall. "All right." Down on the flat land, the Apache warriors moved quickly. They did not mount their horses. They walked, forming a single, unbroken line of men across the width of the land. They stood with their feet planted, their arms at their sides. They made no sound. It was a wall of silent, waiting men. The mob saw this and stirred uneasily. The sight of the disciplined warrior line was more intimidating than if they had been screaming. Sheriff Gantry rode back and forth in front of his men. "You see," he shouted, pointing. "You see their defiance. They have taken the field. They are choosing their ground for a fight." A man from the mob, a big farmer named Harold, called out, "Sheriff, they are just standing there." "Of course they are standing there," Gantry yelled. "They are waiting for us to get closer. Then they will attack. They are savages. They do not think like we do." Joe could not stand it anymore. He stepped off the porch and began walking across the yard, toward the space between the two lines. "Joe, get back here," Ben shouted. But Joe kept walking. He walked past his own fence. He walked until he was alone in the empty stretch of dust, halfway between the wall of Apache warriors and the mob of townsmen. He raised his empty hands high in the air. His thin frame looked very small. "Harold," Joe called out, his voice cracking. "Jacob Miller, is that you? It is Joe Dawson." Some of the men in the mob peered forward. They recognized him. "Listen to me," Joe cried. "There is no attack. These people are here to protect me and Ben. That is all. Their chief, she is Lily, the little girl we found years ago. She came back to help us." A murmur went through the mob. Some men looked confused. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Sheriff Gantry spurred his horse forward a few paces. "Do not listen to his lies. The Apache have twisted his mind. He is a traitor to his own kind. He brought them here to slaughter us all." "That is not true," Joe shouted, desperation making his voice shrill. "She is not here for war. She is here for family. Please, just go home." Ben could not stay on the porch. He walked down and stood beside Joe. He did not raise his hands. He just stood there, solid and quiet, facing the mob. Then Lily walked forward. She moved past her line of warriors and came to stand on Joe's other side. She did not look at the mob. She looked at Sheriff Gantry. "You have your wall of fear, Sheriff," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I have my wall of family. You tell your men to look. Which wall looks ready to attack?" The mob fell silent. The men looked. The Apache line had not moved a muscle. They simply waited. Lily, Joe, and Ben stood together, unarmed, in front of them. Sheriff Gantry's face turned a dark red. He saw his story falling apart. He drew his pistol from its holster. He did not point it. He just held it, a clear threat. "You are all blind. Shoot now, before they do." But no one in the mob raised a gun. The moment stretched out, thin and tight as a wire. In the terrible silence, a young man in the mob, Jacob Miller's boy, slowly lowered his rifle. "I know Joe Dawson," the boy said, his voice young and unsure. "He would not lie about this." The wire snapped, but not into violence. It snapped into a fragile, trembling standoff. No one moved to shoot, but no one moved to leave either. The two walls faced each other, held apart by three people standing alone in the dust and by a single moment of doubt. The silence stretched out, thin and hot. No one in the mob moved to shoot. No one in the Apache line moved at all. Sheriff Gantry's face was a thundercloud, his hand still gripping his pistol. Joe's mind was racing, his eyes darting from Gantry to Lily and back. The sheriff's sneering voice, his story about savages, his eagerness for a fight. It scratched at an old memory, one that had been buried for 20 years. He leaned closer to Lily, keeping his voice a whisper only she and Ben could hear. "Lily, your wound. That first day, we always thought it was from a fight between bands, but Ben said it right off. It was a gunshot, not an arrow." Lily's eyes stayed fixed on Gantry, but she gave a small nod. "It was a gun. I was a child. My band was near the Western Hills. Trappers came. They shot at us. One of them shot me. I fell. My people had to run. The trappers left me for dead." Her hand went to the small scar on her shoulder. Joe felt a cold certainty settle in his bones. He looked at Ben and saw the same understanding dawning in his friend's hard eyes. Ben's gaze shifted to the sheriff, taking in the man's swagger, his cruelty, his history. "Gantry was a trapper," Ben said, the words quiet and flat. "Before he was a sheriff. He boasted about it when he first came to Cedar Fork." Joe's heart hammered against his ribs. He took a step forward, away from Lily and Ben, toward the mob and the sheriff. "Dale Gantry," Joe shouted. The name cut through the tense quiet. The sheriff's head snapped toward him. "What do you want, you old fool? Get back with your savage friends. You were a trapper 25 years ago. You worked the Western Hills." Gantry's eyes narrowed. "So what? Many men were." "My girl was shot in those hills," Joe said, his voice growing stronger. "Shot by trappers and left to die. Were you there?" A flicker of something, surprise then anger, passed over Gantry's face. He recovered quickly, laughing a harsh, loud laugh. "You are crazy. You see an Apache army and you lose your mind? I have never shot a child." But his laugh was too loud. It was a performance for the mob. Lily walked forward to stand beside Joe. She did not shout. Her voice was clear and carried like a stone dropped in still water. "The trapper who shot me was a big man. He had a loud voice. He had a hat with a feather in the band. He laughed when I fell." The description hung in the air. Several of the older men in the mob looked at Gantry. They had seen that hat. They had heard that laugh. Gantry's smile vanished. His knuckles were white on his pistol. "You lying squaw. You are trying to save your skin." "Why would she lie about this?" Joe cried, turning to face the men in the mob. "Why? She came here to protect us. Gantry is the one who wants a war. He told us he would burn us out for our land. He wants the railroad money. He is using your fear to make himself rich." "He is lying," Gantry roared, his face purpling with rage. He took a step forward, his pistol rising slightly. "They are all in it together." "You want a war so bad, Sheriff?" Ben's voice, low and gravelly, cut through the noise. He took a few slow steps until he was standing in front of Gantry's horse. He looked up at the man, utterly unafraid. "Why? Because you cannot stand the thought of the one you failed to kill coming back to stop you?" The direct challenge seemed to crack Gantry's control. All his cunning, his lies, were crumbling under the simple weight of the truth being spoken aloud. His arrogance boiled over. "She was just a savage pup," he spat, the words exploding from him. He pointed the pistol at Lily. "And she still is. All of them are. They are animals on my land. I should have finished the job then. I will finish it now." The moment froze. He had said it. Asterisk, my land. I should have finished the job. A ripple went through the mob. Harold, the big farmer, lowered his shotgun all the way, letting the barrel point at the ground. Young Jacob Miller's boy stared at the sheriff with wide, horrified eyes. Joe looked at the faces of the men from Miller's Crossing and Oak Flat. He saw the anger in their faces start to change. It was not gone, but it was turning, shifting away from the wall of silent warriors and toward the red-faced, shaking man with the gun. The words hung in the hot air, ugly and final. Sheriff Gantry stared at the faces of the men he had brought with him. He saw their anger twist into something else: confusion, disgust, understanding. Harold, the big farmer, took a step toward Gantry's horse. "You shot a little girl?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "It was war. It was different then," Gantry spat. But the fight was leaking out of him. His story was broken. "This ain't war," Harold said. He turned to the other men in the mob. "This is a man trying to steal land and using us to do his killing for him. I am done here." He threw his shotgun into the back of his wagon with a loud clatter. One by one, the other men lowered their weapons. They did not look at the Apache warriors anymore. They looked at Gantry with a new, clear hatred. Ben moved quickly. He walked up to Gantry's horse and grabbed the bridle. "Get down," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Gantry looked at the mob, at the warriors, at Lily's cold stare. The pistol in his hand felt suddenly heavy and useless. He was alone. He slowly slid from the saddle, his boots hitting the dirt. Two men from Cedar Fork, who had been part of the mob but now looked ashamed, stepped forward. They took the pistol from Gantry's hand. They took the sheriff's star from his vest. Joe let out a long, shaky breath. He turned and walked back toward the porch of his house. He was tired, down to his bones. Ben followed, guiding Gantry along with a firm grip on his arm. Lily looked at Kaya and gave a single, small nod. Kaya called out an order. As one, the line of Apache warriors turned and began to walk back to their camp. The wall of family was no longer needed. Joe, Ben, and Lily stood together on the porch. The men from the mob gathered in a half circle in the yard below, their anger gone, replaced by a sheepish curiosity. The arrested sheriff sat on the bottom step, his head in his hands. Joe cleared his throat. He looked at the faces of the men from the town and the other settlements. "The truth is simple," he said, his voice old but clear. "We found a hurt child. We helped her. That is all. For a year, she was our family. We called her Lily. She went back to her own family. We missed her every day." Ben spoke next, his words short. "Gantry wanted our land for the railroad. He threatened us. Lily heard we were in trouble. She came back, not with an army for war, with her family to protect her family. That is all." Lily stepped forward. She touched the wooden horse around her neck. "These two men taught a lost, scared girl that not all faces are enemies. They taught me about kindness without a price. I came back to honor that, to protect them. My people stood with me to protect a kindness. That is why we came." Harold looked from the old ranchers to the Apache chief. He shook his head slowly, a sad smile on his face. "We let ourselves be led by fear and lies. I am sorry, Joe." "Ben." He looked at Lily and gave a respectful nod. "Ma'am." The other men murmured their agreement. The fight was gone. In the days that followed, the Apache camp packed up quietly. Lily stayed for 3 more days. She sat with Joe and Ben on the porch in the evenings. They did not talk much. They just sat, watching the sun set over the land they had all fought for. On the morning of the 4th day, Lily prepared her horse. Joe and Ben stood with her in the yard. "You will be all right now," Lily said. "The railroad will not trouble you. The new man they are talking about for sheriff is a good man. The story is known." "Will you come back?" Joe asked, his pale eyes hopeful. Lily smiled. It was a warm, true smile. "This is always my home too. I will visit. But my people need me. I have duties there." Ben held out his hand. Lily shook it, then pulled him into a brief, strong hug. She hugged Joe longer. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," Joe whispered back. She mounted her horse. With a final wave, she turned and rode south toward the hills where her other life waited. Joe and Ben watched her until she was a speck, then gone. The ranch was quiet again, but the silence was different now. It was not the silence of emptiness or fear. It was the quiet of a storm that had passed. The land was still dry, the cows were still few, but it was theirs. And somewhere in the vastness of the territory, a part of their family was riding strong and free, connected not by blood, but by a simple, powerful act of kindness that had changed the future of the whole valley.